Welcome to New Ways, New Habits podcast, hosted by change behaviour experts T3 and Kiddy & Partners.
If you don't know who we are, we offer leadership and behavioural change products and services to multinational companies, large public sector organisations and SMEs within the UK and globally. I'm Laura Bradshaw.
And I'm Eleanor Boniface. And we will be your hosts for the upcoming podcast, where we will bring voices of these experts to you directly to give you insightful and innovative updates on all aspects of the world of people and organisational development.
To kickstart this podcast, we obviously wanted to bring you the best of the best. So please welcome Research and Impact Director by day and Professor, well, still by day, Zara Whysall.
Gosh, there's a lot of pressure there. Hi.
So firstly, thank you for taking the time to bring relevant concepts to our listeners. And we are super lucky to have you to join us for a 3-part series on this topic. So could you just tell us a bit about what you do and what inspired you to go into this sector?
Yeah, so by training I'm a business psychologist, so that means I did first degree in psychology, then master's in occupational psychology, and then didn't have to but couldn't stop, but went on to do a PhD looking at sort of behaviour change in more depth. And I think what got me here in this sector, so broadly speaking, leadership development, it's about, for me, applying psychology to the workplace. We spend so much time at work that it's nice, one, that we can use psychology to help that be a really positive experience for everybody, for individuals, and also for organizations, that we can use psychology to help it not only be a positive experience for individuals, but also have positive outcomes for organizations. So hopefully achieving that win-win. I think that's what got me here.
So I guess if we get down to the nitty gritty and what feels like years of our research, and Zara, definitely yours, what we like to call rapid evolution. So Zara's been working incredibly hard to pull all of this research together. So Zara, could you tell us a bit, essentially, what is rapid evolution? And most importantly, why is it relevant to organisations in this day and age?
Yep. So most of our clients, if not all of them, are trying to change in some way. So obviously we have clients across public and private sector. In the private sector, massive pressures to grow often, but certainly to transform. I think every organisation we're working with is looking to change, transform in some way. And as every people practitioner or HR or talent professional will tell you, change is hard. And there's loads of reasons for that. We could probably have a separate podcast from a psychological perspective as to why change is hard. To cut it short, the brain likes to predict. We like consistency. We don't like any surprises. So the brain is constantly looking to predict and to have stability, to know what's going on. But the world isn't like that. So, VUCA, all of that, I don't think you can read a single thing in HR these days without talking about the pace of change. So we know it's a real challenge. So we've got the external environment changing at an ever-increasing rate. And then we've got people who don't change as fast as tech changes typically. And we've got professionals that we work with day in, day out, trying to sort of match the two. How do we keep up with the pace of change? How do we help our people keep up with the pace of change? So this research was really about looking into companies who do that really well, companies who don't do that so well, or companies who have a really rapid change and transformational growth, and then it bombs or it tanks. And looking at what is it that they do, right? We know that some organizations can do this and do this really well. Many don't. And I found some really good research which highlighted that, yes, many don't. So change and progress stalling is common to most large organizations. But the good news was that a lot of the things that enable rapid growth, rapid evolution, are under leaders' control. So that was kind of okay, there is something we can do about this. It's not just about the economy and things beyond our control, massive macro things. There is a lot that we can do to support leaders to achieve rapid evolution. But rapid evolution is an actual term. I didn't just make it up. So in evolutionary biology, rapid evolution is a thing that has been identified, which is basically where animals are in environments that are really challenging and changing. They have found ways to evolve at a rapid rate, a more rapid rate than is typically the case with evolution, which is, typically slow, as we all know. But things like lizards, who obviously used to be in forests or jungles, or I don't know where they live, but trees generally, are now having to live in urban environments where their hands and fingers have evolved to be able to grip onto flat surfaces of buildings as opposed to trees or plants or whatever. And also some great examples from Chernobyl. So, the exclusion zone, which is still highly radioactive, and people still aren't allowed to go there because it will give us cancer. But there's some wolves who have found a way, they have evolved rapidly to be able to live there without getting whatever it is you get from radiation, awful cancers, I guess. So so rapid evolution is a thing. It's a really interesting concept. And we looked into how can we help, what are the principles in a business context? How can we help leaders develop this?
Going back a bit, and when you say these businesses and these organizations, is this specific to a particular industry, or is this applicable across the border?
Yeah, it's applicable across the board. Sometimes it's assumed that the only organizations looking to change fast or even, to grow is private organizations. And obviously ones in the tech sector, you would assume it's particularly them. But every organization that we're working with is looking to change. Whether it's, if you're in the public sector and your budgets are cut, you've got to do more with less. So it's still change. So I'd say it applies across all sectors. Even if you're not in the tech sector, change because of tech is still affecting you. It's still coming into what you do, whether it's how you deliver your services, whether it's something in your supply chain. Tech will be changing how we do things in every sector. So yeah, it applies across the board.
So I guess with rapid evolution, we can't all be chameleons. We can't all fit into a new environment really quickly. So what does it actually look like in business? What are some principles that, make it up in business?
Yeah. And in fact, I think in the next podcast, we will be talking about personality preferences, because that is a good point. So some people are more naturally disposed and open to change than others. So there are, individual preferences. But of course, it's not fixed. We can help people operate outside of their preferences. But for sure, there are some key principles that we've identified which could be really helpful for supporting organizations to develop this. So the first one is about change becoming not just something you do every now and then, but who you are and how you do things. So we tend to approach change still as kind of turning it on, turning it off. Now we're doing a change program. Now we're not. Everyone's getting really fatigued with change because of that. But because of the pace of change in the external environment, it's got to be something that is just how we do things. We operate in an agile way every day. And by doing it that way, hopefully it becomes less fatiguing because it's not turned on, turned off. It's just how we do things. So that's the first one. The second principle is about think big but act small. So as companies get bigger, they typically get slower. We get burdened down by internal process. Of course, some of that's important, but it's also about leaders resisting it. So leaders who do this really well, they resist it becoming too bureaucratic, slowing down too much, and also, the senior people becoming too far from the front end, whether that's your customers, your clients, whoever it is, and sort of losing touch with what's changing in the outside world. The third principle is about pace. So fast, slow, we call it. So it's about the fact that it's not sustainable to have the foot down on the accelerator the whole time. We just can't do that, as people specialists, many of us, with backgrounds in psychology. I mean, I think every human knows it's just not feasible. It's just not sustainable. So it's got to be about recognizing when to back off, and it's also helpful to then be lifting your head up to look at how have things changed? Are we still relevant? is what we're doing still what our clients, customers, whoever they are, want and need. So it's about varying the pace. The fourth one is less is more. So there's a real temptation to, when you want to go faster, to do more. Let's just do more. Do it faster. But that's not what you find when you look at companies who do this really well. Less is more. They are really clear on their priorities. So they don't have a long list of multiple things, which they're all calling priorities. They're quite cutthroat in making sure that it's these things that we're going after. And then the fifth one is about the principle that tension is what creates energy for change. And that's not tension in a negative sense, it's positive tension. If we're kind of just comfortable, cozy, we kind of just drift along a bit. If we drift along, in our comfort zones, it's not particularly exciting. And there's a real risk that the external pace of change overtakes us before we even know it. So we need to have, when we identified these competing tensions, and we need to be kind of agile, moving between, that sort of looking outside versus being clear on what we want to go after, that taking risks, and then that deciding what we want to really focus on. So we've identified these key tensions, but one of them is the fact that you need tension to be able to move forward.
So from a listener's understanding, rapid evolution allows a company to get ahead of the market in times of crazy fast growth or change, but there will be challenges when implementing this. But you did mention a phrase called productive paranoia, and I love this. And when I first heard it, when we were doing all of our research, I thought this sounded really interesting. So I just wondered if you could explain.
Yeah, so I like the term productive paranoia. It describes, it's the opposite of complacency. So lack of complacency, because it's easy to decide on your strategy, decide on what you think is important. And it may well have been based on really good data at the time, right? But if you get your head down and focus internally on doing that, achieving that, then if you're not careful, the world has changed, around you, and you're sort of out of sync. So it's about that continual paranoia as to, are we still relevant? Is this still what people want? Are we still doing the right thing? Are we still heading in the right direction? But productively, so not getting stuck, but using that productively to think about how we might adapt and change and go with the flow. So that's kind of what it's about, really, questioning that relevance, not getting complacent, not getting too stuck. And there's loads of cognitive biases that get in the way of us doing it, like sunk costs, for instance. Sunk cost fallacy is where we kind of, we've decided on this and we've invested on this, so we've got to keep going with it, despite the fact that you might be looking outside. Peloton's a great example of that. Looking outside thinking, actually, I'm not sure this is the right path anymore. By the time you've sort of turned the tanker around, it's too late. So it's about that questioning.
So going based on decision making as well, what about the fearless experimentation versus sharp decisions tension? Because we appreciate that companies we work in where the balance isn't always right, so making sure we're testing out innovative ideas or opportunities, but ultimately balancing that with having to make some sort of clear decision about what they're actually going to take forwards. I mean, how do you accomplish that?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps one of the trickiest ones in all of this. So experimentation is really important in a fast-moving organization, because if you want to do things at scale, you want to be a market leader, then you can't sort of dither around the edges. You've probably got to go quite hard, and you see that with case studies of organizations who do this well. But of course, you don't want to just go straight in really hard. We're going major on this, and there's great examples of Tesco, for instance, when they brought in Tesco Express. They did loads of really controlled, detailed testing of the exact format that would work, and they'd change it, they'd see how customers liked it or didn't like it, and then they'd change it again. And they did this but quickly, not taking decades. They did it quickly, did the testing, they identified this is what seems to work, let's go with that, and then roll out at big scale. So you need that kind of constantly testing, exploring options, but of course you can't do it forever. At one point, if you're not careful, you're going to be overtaken by your competitors. So got to have that good decision making on what worked, what didn't work. And sometimes that might be leaving it there. It didn't work. We're just going to have to accept those losses. And cognitive biases work against us in doing this. Also legacy, like emotional biases of, well, we've always done this. We can't let that go. We can't not do this line of business anymore. And the companies who are really good at it, they, in fact, there's a term I came across called creative destruction. I think it was called creative destruction. And it's about not hanging on to things that they've had their day, let it go. We're going to let go of that product line, but we're going to replace it with this new thing because we think that's the future. So it's about not letting your emotions, drive your decision making, hanging on to things that you should let go of, and sunk costs and risk aversion and all of those things. Yeah, really interesting.
Would an example of that be where Blockbuster didn't do any streaming, and then Netflix kind of took over, and Blockbuster was left behind because they didn't go along with the disruption in the actual industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows what the conversations were, but it would have been great to have sort of been a fly on the wall, wouldn't it? And I'd imagine there were all of those biases were present there, like, but this is who we are, this is what we do. That will never catch on, that dismissiveness, that kind of overconfidence, not enough questioning, or maybe it is, what if? Yeah, absolutely. There's some great examples of that.
So if leaders can find that balance, it would obviously really help the culture of the company. And then that results in employee retention, increased productivity, stronger reputations. But realistically, how can organizations actually achieve this? Are there any things that leaders could do, or, not necessarily quick wins, but are there things that they can start putting in place to help them get to that success point?
So the main thing is about balancing tensions. So the overarching tension of all of this is fix the vision, flex the journey. So it's about being clear on the one thing that won't change. Many of our clients call it their North Star, which gives people clarity and something to cling on to in all of this. When everything else is changing, we've got that clarity. That's where we're headed. So make sure that you're really clear and everyone else is really clear on what that thing is. Hopefully make sure that's really motivating for everybody in your company, or anyone you might want to be in your company in future. And don't forget about it. We often work with clients, and you might ask a team, a fairly senior team, so what's the vision, whether that's for your division or for the company as a whole, and they'll all be sort of scratching their heads a bit and going, oh God, yeah, what is it again? So it needs to be something that's not just a tick box, that actually means something, and therefore you use it and you talk about it a lot. So, and then flex the journey. So it's about having that agility. So that's the second thing. So, and it's where the other tensions come in. So as a leader, it would be making sure that you are like the conductor of an orchestra, looking at what's going on across the organization. Are we asking enough questions? That productive paranoia. Are we going courageously, that courageous conviction? Are we going full steam enough? Should we be going bigger? Should we be going further? Should we be being more ambitious on something? Are we dithering too much? Looking at that, looking at all of the other tensions, should we be experimenting a bit more? Should we be taking a bit more risk? Are we being, effective in our decision making? So really looking at all of the tensions as an organization as a whole, but also then for everybody within their teams to be noticing what's going on. Are we being pulled too far in one direction as opposed to another? So yeah, those would be my suggestions. And I think in the next podcast, we'll talk specifically about the personality preferences and how individual differences might pull you. So there'll be some more tips there. And then the other thing is looking at your culture as a whole. So I think we'll talk about that in our third podcast, won't we? So your culture, your organizational culture might pull you, might be sort of, it's, obviously an invisible force, but it might be pulling you more in one direction than another. Why is that? You've got to really unpick what's going on in our culture. What processes do we have in place? Formal, informal? Is it how we're measuring people? Is it how we're rewarding people? Whether that's, financially or not. What do we praise people? What do we put people on a pedestal for? Is it about taking risks, or is it not about taking risks? So really thinking about those invisible influences and how they might be pulling us in one direction or another.
I suppose I'm putting my marketing hat on here, but the leaders sound like the key players in this situation, meaning the internal communication needs to be so key from the start. So like you said about the North Star, that everyone has that goal, everyone understands what that is, because employees were informed, they were influenced, they were motivated from the very start.
Yeah, definitely.
And I just thought it'd be quite nice to round up the 3 key takeaways. So firstly, change needs to become who you are, not something somebody else does to you. Secondly, transformation and growth won't come about by just doing more, working harder and pedaling faster. It's just not sustainable. It's got to be about doing things differently. And thirdly, ensure tensions are balanced and identify the skill gaps to prevent getting stuck. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more about rapid evolution, we'll be joined by Zara for part 2, where we'll be discussing how to help teams keep up with the pace of change.
And most importantly, why is it relevant to organisations in this day and age?
And it wouldn't be right without saying, don't forget to provoke, plant, and practice these new ways and new habits.